strangers, it's Liv. Welcome back to my channel. So today, what I'm going to be doing is running through the eyeshadow makeup palette that I virtually made for the movie The Devil Wears Prada. It's just a movie that I keep going back to time and time again because there's just something about it that I absolutely love. So I'm going to show the concept art really quick right here, and this is kind of what I put together. So I will go into each of the shades as we go along, and then I'll kind of do a full review of it at the end. The first color is Cerulean, and I think that when you think Devil Wears Prada, that scene is probably the one that sticks out the most to anybody, right? So not only is that scene iconic, but it also kind of shows the dynamic initially when Andy's starting out, because that is her first day on the job, is wearing that cerulean sweater. She thinks that the two belts, they look identical. She kind of makes a laugh at it, and that's when Miranda really kind of shows her up and shows that this isn't something that you're just going to be able to laugh your way through. Like, you need to take this job seriously. So that's also where you kind of see the dynamic between Nigel, Emily, Miranda, and Andy all together really at once for the first time on the first day of the job. That shade, even if I had no other shades in this palette, I feel like Cerulean has to be the shade that needs to be in it, just because that is the scene I feel like a lot of people think of when they think of the movie The Devil Wears Prada. It's also very prominent too because it's at the beginning of the film, so it kind of does set the tone for how the rest of the movie is going to go in terms of Miranda always having the upper hand in a sense. So I really kind of like that scene, and I feel like it really shows Miranda at her best, and it shows that Andy's really going to need to work hard in order to be successful at her job. The second color is a nice turquoise color, and I called it the belt. So without the two belts that looked identical to Andy, the cerulean scene and kind of the iconic scene of the movie wasn't going to happen without it. I also thought that those two colors really worked well together, so that's why I included it. And I feel like the color does stand out in terms of it being a different color of a turquoise, as well as it matching the belt. The next color is similar to kind of the color that I'm wearing, is the color Emily. I feel like Emily was kind of like the main character before Andy kind of came into the runway universe, and she wears this iconic green eyeshadow, I believe in a couple different scenes, so I definitely wanted to include it. When looking and researching for the makeup palette, something that I did look at was like eyeshadow, because I didn't want to, copy somebody else's design, but there were a decent amount of like blog posts back in the day, because this movie came out in 2007, so blogs were still really, really big, and people writing blogs about where they could find the eyeshadow, so I definitely wanted to include that. I also think that Emily goes through this movie and she's dragged through the movie, but I also think that the green is just a standout moment, so that is why I included it in the palette. The next color that I'm going to go over is kind of a light gray, which I titled Paris. Now, Paris is something that's brought up throughout the entire movie. It's brought up on Andy's first day. It's brought up numerous times. They go to Paris in the movie, and I really chose that gray because I feel like when the film was shot in Paris, a lot of the scenes, it was overcast, it was gray. Not a lot of good things happened in Paris. Nigel kind of got screwed over. That's where Andy quits. She throws her gray phone into the fountain that's also gray. And I think that that's kind of where Andy realizes her potential as well, and realizes that she doesn't need to kind of stand up for Miranda anymore, and she's her own person, and she's finally allowed herself to break free. So I definitely wanted to have a shade that emulated Paris as a whole, but also kind of the negativity of the whole Paris experience, because she shouldn't have been there in the first place. She had the one night stand with Christian Thompson. There weren't a lot of good memories to come out of Paris besides her reaching her potential. So I wanted to make sure that Paris wasn't a bright shade by any means, but it also kind of emulated the overcast of the weather as well as the feel in terms of the color story. So that's why I included the light gray. The next color was a color that I really liked. It's kind of a magenta pink, and it's called Florals Spring. Now, this is another kind of iconic line that I feel like every springtime, it's in somebody's Instagram caption. It's been captioned on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter all over the place, and it's definitely an iconic line from the movie. And I thought that this color also rounded out the palette as well. We'll get into the other colors as we go on, but I really liked this color, and I felt like even if you wanted to use it as like a blush, you could kind of almost use it as that. But this was a line that couldn't be taken out, and I definitely wanted to include it in the palette because it's an iconic Miranda Priestley line. The next color that I have is kind of a light beige taupe color, and it's called Manuscript. So I really liked this because this is really a moment where Andy picked up the pace and really showed Miranda what she was made of. This is when Miranda asked Andy to get the unreleased manuscript to the next Harry Potter book for her two daughters before they go on vacation. And this is essentially where she's like, I quit, it's over, everything's done, I can't do this. And then she kind of bucks up and realizes that Christian Thompson was able to get that connection scene for her to get the manuscripts, and she was successful in doing that. And I just think that that's really kind of her moment where she kind of stuck it to Miranda and said like, oh yeah, here's just one for your reference. Like, she really went above and beyond, and I think that's really where she starts to like kick off and starts to do really well and impresses her. I think there's little moments throughout the movie where she slowly starts to impress Miranda, but I think that that was a really big ask of her, which I don't think was fair of Miranda by any means, but I really think that Andy said like, I did that, I didn't give up, I remembered, I used my resources wisely, and I was able to deliver. So I really liked that. And then just overall for the color, I think it's always like a good base shade or a good like transition shade to use with the other colors. So that's definitely another reason why I wanted to add like a light beige to the palette. The next color I included was this lavender color, and I called it Interview because it's the color of Andy's sweater where she interviews for the job that she eventually gets. I really liked this because I feel like that wouldn't be a color that the other girls were necessarily wearing. You kind of see the montage in the beginning of the movie of all of the girls getting ready, the different ways, the different outfits, jewelry, even food that they use to prepare for their day. And then you kind of see Andy in her, I guess like lower class. I don't really want to call it that, but like she's not living the same lifestyle as some of these like beauty fashion ladies. And I think that I really liked that purple shade just because it worked well with other colors in the palette. But I think also that's kind of like her first impression on Miranda, and that's Miranda's first impression on her. So that is a really important scene in the movie because that's really where she gives it to her. And I think that that's why Miranda consistently tried to push Andy to her limits, because she knew what she was capable of. And I think that first moment of Andy standing up to Miranda where she's like, look, I'm smart, I might not know fashion, but I can learn, and I have a lot of experience. And even though Miranda dismisses her, there's still that little spot in the back of Miranda's head that said, this is who I want for the position. And that's why she ends up getting it, with Emily running downstairs and bringing her back up. That's why I really liked that lavender color, because not only will it work with other colors in the palette, but I also think it's about the first impression that Andy leaves on Miranda. The next color, also something that should come to no surprise, because I feel like, again, it was a very iconic scene in the movie, is unfortunately when Emily gets hit by a car and she has all of the scarves, I believe from Hermes, and they're flying all over the streets of New York. The boxes, the bags, the scarves, everything. And this is really a turning point in the movie as well, because this is kind of where Andy has to step in and say like, I'm going to Paris, all this stuff. So there really kind of is that struggle between Emily and Andy doesn't want to take that step, but then you find out that, you know, she does, and then that's when she finds out, oh, I'm not like you. That whole sort of scene, if you're watching this, I'm going to assume that you've watched Devil Wears Prada. So yeah, I definitely think that this scene, it's just shot in such a way too that really is like, you're watching it and you're just like, oh no. And then that's, you know, when Emily breaks her diet and she's like, well, you know, if I can't go to Paris, what's it all been for? And that's really, again, a turning point in the movie. The next color is Cube of Cheese, which also goes back to Emily. So I guess there's probably more Emily references, but I also feel like it is something that is memed and quoted a lot, is whenever I get hungry and before I pass out, I'm going to eat a cube of cheese to stay thin. Obviously, we do not want any eating disorders, or we don't condone any of that. Like, get help if you need it. But I like the kind of burnt mustard shade. I think it works really well with scarves as well as Manuscript. And I think that it can also be kind of used as like a pop of color in the inner eyes, because I know that like yellow is kind of popular. So I really like this and how it worked with other colors of the palette. And again, it was such an iconic line. And when I think a cube of cheese, I kind of think of like yellow American cheese for some reason. So that's kind of why I went with that. But I also wanted to pick a color that would work with other colors in the palette. So that's kind of why I went with that like burnt mustard. Okay, we are down to our last three colors. So the third to last is $5 strawberries. Now, watching this movie back, I didn't really realize how many like food references there were, especially because like eating disorders and like not eating was like important in the movie for like, you know, Andy lost weight and, oh, you're an 8, that's the new size 16 and things like that. So I was kind of surprised by all of the food references as I was like watching and doing more research for them doing research. There were a lot of contenders in terms of what food I wanted to put into the palette. So that is why I included cube of cheese, but I also felt like because of how many food references there were, I needed to include another one just for like an extra pop of color. So just some contenders that I was going to also include, possibly, was corn chowder, the steak that she throws into the sink, which literally makes me mad every time because that steak looks so good, the $8 Jarlsberg on the sandwich, the pumpernickel and Jarlsberg, and the crunch that Nate makes is just so like, and I was gonna do like maybe a white shade, but again, I stuck with the $5 strawberries. So I think that there were a lot of food references, but I liked the $5 strawberries because this was when I thought that they were going to be celebrating Andy quitting her job, and she's still doing like the twin science fair project. So I think that this was also kind of a turning point in their relationship because he was so excited for her to quit, which I have in just my notes, Nate is trash rant, which I'm not gonna go into because that's not the point of this, but I mean, he is kind of trash for all intents and purposes, but she stated her position and she stuck her guns, and I feel like the $5 strawberries is something that always kind of stood out to me, but I did kind of like the red shade and how it worked with the rest of the palette. I think that you can do a really cool look with $5 strawberries and Florals and Spring, as well as kind of smoking it out with a couple other colors that we have yet to get to. I really like kind of having like a bold red in the palette as well, just because it evens things out, but I also think that it works really well with some other colors. The second to last color is Pursed Lips, and I actually took this color from Miranda's, like a screen grab of the movie of Miranda Priestley's lips, just because another really iconic scene in terms of showing how strong Miranda's influence is in this movie, when the look on her face dictates how things are in terms of like, is it gonna work, is it not gonna work, and then pursed lips means utter and total disaster. So the final shade is a black shade, so it's always nice to have either like a white or a black in a palette, I feel, just to kind of really deepen looks or brighten looks and just kind of use things to smoke out, use as eyeliner. There's a lot of different uses for a black shadow, but I called this one Heels because of Andy's first heels that are given to her from Nigel. I feel like Andy wears a lot of black in the movie, and a lot of people wear a lot of black in the movie just because I feel like, kind of going back to like, it makes you look slim, it makes you look trim, but I think after she gets that first pair of heels is really when you start to see her transformation throughout the movie. She also wears a black dress in Paris, which again is kind of where she discovers herself and realizes that she's better than the job that she's currently in, and when she decides to quit. And then she's also kind of wearing the blazer and the boots, and that's kind of when Miranda first recognizes that like she's starting to care about her appearance. So I really wanted to have a color that kind of emulated her glow up in terms of like not only shoes, but in terms of her entire fashion sense throughout the movie. But I really do think that it began with the first pair of heels. So that is why I have that shade. Here's the palette again, and I also included some photos of what I think it would look like kind of in the pan. I'm not a graphic designer, so this is kind of like the best that I could come up with, but I really liked it because when you open it up, there would be a mirror, and then on one side there would be the Devil Wears Prada with the stiletto and then the devil heel, and then on the other side I thought it would be cool if it just said like the Devil Wears Prada on it. What I really liked was the cover of the palette, which was a runway magazine. I was trying to go back and forth of like the different things that I could do, but I really think having the runway magazine for the cover would be really, really awesome. I took this image from a Facebook group, so I will link the group below just to like give them full credit, and it was if the Devil Wears Prada turned into a musical, but I really like the styling of it. It's gray and black and red, and I feel like there's those colors in the palette as well, and I think it's a really cool design to have on a makeup palette. So yeah, that is it for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you liked it. I really liked putting this together and watching my favorite movie a couple times in order to prepare. Thank you so much for watching today's video. If you like it, go ahead and give it a like, and if you like me or want to see more of me in the future, go ahead and hit subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Bye!